Welcome back to Henry Felix Discourses. Today we'll be talking about Winsor School again and the mathematics and athletics part of their philosophies. They may seem to be a little bit of a juxtaposition, but they are right on the same theme, as I think you'll see. Now, just to review how to get to this PDF that I'm talking about in case you want to read it online. And I think it's important to do that because I've tried to save this PDF and it doesn't save well. I think you need the paid version of Adobe Acrobat to get that, which is $240 a year and, whatever. But as long as you download it, it seems to work fine online. The pages display well, etc. So anyway, it's Winsor School, as you can see right here, top private school for girls, etc. Click on that, it takes you to this web page. You go up here to the right, see where my thing's moving around? Go here, go to About, and then down here where it says Equity and Inclusion. When you click on that, you get to this. It says Equity and Inclusion. And you scroll all the way down to the bottom. It says DEI Report, this thing. Click on that, and you'll get to this page. It says Lift Every Voice. This is the publication. And then you click on this, what I'm circling right here. You click on Read the Report, and you will get the PDF. Okay, so here's what we'll be reading today. This is in Appendix B, so you have to go down quite a few pages. This is on page 90 of the PDF. That's more like 45 or something of the document PDF that you get. It'll say on the screen that it's page 45, whatever, but it's page 90 of the actual pamphlet. And then go a little bit farther down, and we see mathematics right there. And I'll just read it out. And just keep it in mind compared to what we saw with science yesterday. The math department is looking at how students from different racial and ethnic groups are represented in different levels of courses to determine if there is an issue or an inequity at play. Now, I sense a very different tone than science. Science was all of this over here. Remember these columns, and it went farther? Science did its best to fully embrace DEI, and mathematics doesn't seem to be doing that. They're saying, we're looking at it. We're seeing if there's anything wrong. To me, the message is there's nothing wrong. You've brought this in. We'll comply with this so that you've got something to put in your pamphlet, but, there it is. Not much ground given there. So, next, one result of this work is that the department has created a math learning center to ensure that students in the community have access to academic support and to opportunities for enrichment at no cost to students. I'm going to bet that that's always been available. That sounds like office hours. That sounds like there's been a teacher available or teachers all the time. And whether people show up or not, who knows? If they don't, I guess they correct papers. But I can't imagine that Winsor has ever had a situation where you don't have that access. And why there would be a cost to it at school, I have no idea. So I think they're saying we've got that already. What else are we really supposed to do? But that it does fit nominally what they're asking for in DEI. Okay, well, we're doing that. Great. Next is the department has also created a new math acceleration policy that provides transparency and multiple pathways to accelerated coursework. This, I have to laugh a little because I think this is like energetic compliance. That's how I would put it, because they're definitely complying with this. And one thing that you hear from teachers all the time, and especially math teachers, I'd say, is that there need to be accelerated groups. And this is a way of saying, okay, this is great. This will help us promote our acceleration policy. And there'll be transparency as to how you get into that accelerated group, which is probably doing well, on multiple pathways to accelerated coursework. So whatever that means, who knows? Maybe they'll accelerate some people who... DEI does demand that you accelerate people sometimes who probably shouldn't be there because they want numbers. I base that on things like the Boston Public Schools, who eliminated their accelerated groups because they did not have the right representation. So they did not think that there were enough members of certain ethnic groups, and they said that means it's illegitimate. It must be racist. If it doesn't have an X number of minorities in that group, it is therefore racist. That's something that is definitely part of critical race theory. It's not legitimate. It's taking a data point and just drawing a conclusion based on absolutely nothing except that number. It's not fair. It makes people do things that are completely in contravention to reality all the time, and that was one of them. So multiple pathways, I think they're saying, okay, well, we'll see what we do and we'll continue the conversation. I think it would be too bad if they started putting people into a group that they don't belong into. If you've ever had that experience, it's overwhelming. If you get promoted to something, at first you feel great because you say, okay, maybe I should be in this group. And then after a while, if you're not keeping up or you didn't have the grounding from before, like they thought you knew more than you did, and it's not even a matter of whether you could theoretically keep up, but you don't have the grounding yet, then you see your grades start to go down, and that's a crushing experience. But anyway, they're doing it, but that's a very short statement, and they're basically saying, yes, well, we've been doing this and we're going along, but this is not adding anything. And mathematics doesn't really lend itself to all the keywords. Notice how few keywords they used. Pretty much none. I mean, they used inequity, but that's it. Whereas with science, you remember the list, if we listed out all the keywords from DEI and from CRT that were in that, I think we'd have a long list. And there was very little science there. Anyway, moving on to physical education, we'll see something similar. It says, students are required to participate in instructional physical education several times per cycle during the school day. Okay, that's a description of a PE program, nothing more. Additionally, after-school sports options are available for students beginning in Class 2. Windsor has a uniform requirement in physical education to create a sense of community and camaraderie. Okay, I think that's their way of bowing a little bit and saying, okay, we've got stuff about community, and it's called the uniform, and we've always had it. I don't think anyone's being sassy here. If it sounds like I'm saying that they are or thumbing their nose, I don't think they are. I think they're trying to survive. I think they've gotten an assignment to put something that they can use for Appendix B of this, and they want a statement, and they're giving a statement, and uniform does nominally comply with that. It comports with it. They've also always done it, and it's an important part. It is a big part of camaraderie, and I like that they use that word because that's not a DEI word. That doesn't fit in with DEI really. It's not community and like maybe sustainability. I don't know. It's community and justice or belonging or something. They've avoided that and they've said camaraderie because it's the way it's always been. And sports is an excellent way of overcoming our differences with one another in order to work towards a common goal. So they've been doing that all along. You see past anything and everything in your fellow teammates if you are on a team. And, the uniform enhances that. It's true. Anyway, to ensure affordability, uniforms are chosen with cost in mind, and financial aid is available to students who need financial assistance to purchase the required items. And that's the end of the story. So take that for what you will. They probably did that already. Anyway, I see essentially no ground being given to DEI. Now, physical education, I would like to go a little bit deeper on this, though. And this is typical of what happens when you go down the rabbit hole a little bit on DEI and say, where is that coming from? Because I don't know the coaches. I don't know who wrote that. I don't know what the process was. And I would be presuming a lot to think that I could suss out what their motivations were or read their minds. I can't do that. But let's just explore this a little more. Here in this section on inclusion, and I plan on doing something about this later. They talk about norms. I was talking about, what are the norms last time. And we'll get to that. But athletics. Here's what they say about athletics. And this is presumably not coming directly from the athletics department. All coaches, whether part-time or full-time members of the Windsor faculty staff, receive training and comprehensive coaching manual and a comprehensive coaching manual to ensure the proper use of language, boundaries, and safety protocols when it comes to working with Windsor students. I don't know about you, but not too many coaches that I know want to get a manual on how they should behave with their athletes. It's a little bit insulting to say, okay, we as the administration are now going to tell you how you're supposed to deal with your students. There it is. You have to take it as you will. That's work. The bosses always have things that you may not like, and sometimes they're a little demeaning. Sometimes they're a little offensive. Whatever. That's life. But there it is. That's funny that they've decided, okay, we're doing DEI and we're just passing it down to you. Here are your new rules. So just put yourself in that position. Coaches are also encouraged to take part in professional development, increasingly in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion related to athletics specifically. So encouraged, we know what encouraged means when you're working for a school. Encouraged. We're going to specifically somehow find a way to have diversity, equity, and inclusion in relation to athletics. All right, for example, several members of the coaching staff attended the anti-racism fight club that was presented by New England Prep School athletic conferences, and others have been involved in the NEPSAC diversity presentations. We'll talk about that in a second. The director of athletics is also in conversations with the Positive Coaching Alliance to offer a diversity workshop to all Windsor coaches. So the diversity workshop, that sounds like fun. Anyway, what is NEPSAC? Okay, they do spell it out for you, but we'll just talk about that a little bit more right here when we go to New England Preparatory School Athletic Council. Here are their members, lots of members. Once you're in a group like that, it's a helpful group and it can be hard to get out. Here's the legacy. Now, I looked up more about the legacy of NEPSAC, and it is down here. Just give me 1 second. This is how NEPSAC began. This is really fascinating. I was really fascinated by this. December 7th, 1941. Okay, that was Pearl Harbor. They founded it not exactly because of Pearl Harbor, but this was the beginning of the beginning. They said, let's actually move down to the real beginning of it because I highlighted it. This part right here. It says, to his consternation, he learned that transportation companies could no longer charter buses for athletic trips without surrendering any right to replacement tires for buses so chartered. So it sounds like a funny reason to start an athletic association, but that was the reason. They wanted to make sure that they still had interscholastic athletics. The reason they wanted interscholastic athletics, what comes back to this. Okay, I think if there was a dog barking, I apologize for that. This computer is not really up to the task of editing, so I really have to do these in one go, and I can stop if the dog barks, but that's about it, because that is not my dog. Where we were was what they were trying to do with this organization before they made it an organization, and it was here to prepare students for the ordeals these young men were likely to face, and at the same time provide the conventional education that would permit them to take their place in society after the war. So interestingly, they had an endpoint to this. There was an idea that it would be over after the war. We wanted to get them ready. They had a sense of urgency there, and I think that in a way, a lot of CRT and DEI comes from that sense of urgency. Not the movement itself, but the way that it took over schools came from a sense of urgency that was really brought on by George Floyd and some other things like that, but mainly George Floyd. Some of the similar things going on previously. However, I don't think there was a sense of urgency really based on that. I think that was actually for the real CRT people who've been there for a long, long time. I think a lot of the people who implemented DEI had that sense of urgency, but the groundwork has been laid for decades. And for the people who've been laying that groundwork, that was not an emergency like Pearl Harbor. It was an opportunity. It was a good time to jump on this and bring all this in with everyone's feeling that something needs to be done. And we make a lot of bad decisions when they're quick decisions like that based on a sense of urgency. And that's really why that suddenly came into the schools. There was a long history of it. There's a lot of groundwork laid, but it was sudden that it was just there. But it wasn't an idea that they came up with overnight. And it wasn't because of George Floyd that they came up with that idea. That's kind of a marker more. I think it's also interesting that their very next sentence says, confidence in the principles of a liberal education held. They weren't giving up on the idea of what an education was supposed to be. And at that time, America was facing a big crisis as to whether freedom and democracy were the right way to have a country, whether that was going to survive. We were up against the Japanese, of course, with this, but also the Nazis, both dictatorial regimes. Were they more powerful? Included in that really were the Soviets. They were allies at the time, but then after that, they were the biggest threat. Was communism going to beat capitalism? Were they more powerful than we were? And I think people were very worried about that for a long, long time. If you go back to old Twilight Zone episodes, for example, when they talk about the Eastern Bloc, usually the theme is that they're worried that our freedom will be lost. They're worried that the freedom will be lost under communism. And it's not so much a battle between economic systems to them. And that was the most important thing. And people were worried about that. And I think that's the reason why they've got this confidence in the principles of a liberal education. I think we're facing many of the same questions now. Can we continue with free speech and open dialogue? Or does it need to be controlled? CRT definitely seeks to control your thoughts right down to the nitty-gritty. Certain things are allowed and other things are not. And that's something that we need to hold true to, that freedom and free speech and individuality are better and more important and more livable and greater and better for the human soul than the conformity that CRT wants to bring into the schools and into our lives in general. But continuing on, so they had that, and just to go down the rabbit hole a little bit farther, as far as having an endpoint, just at least a vague endpoint. And of course, NEPSAC is still there. Things like that do tend to continue. But here we have the library. This is just a little random, but look at what it says. The new books display always features books related to DEI, prominently and deliberately placed so that patrons, not to mention visitors and prospective families, see that these titles are front and center. So we've got that word always there. I mean, this is meant to be eternal. There's supposed to be a constant and eternal struggle with your identity and your racial identity and your any other identity of the many identities that they define or refer to. And they want people to know that that's front and center. Most important thing. There is a signal here. Now, signaling's good. You need to know what a school is about. You need signals in order to interpret what a school is about. Whether this is a virtue signal, I'd say probably. We want everybody to see these books so that people know what the school is about, but it's also a virtue signal. It's a little bit of both. And that's one of the good things about Winsor, is at least they're open about it. Some places are saying, oh no, we don't do that. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. But then they really are. And at least it's like right there. You can see it. But it's a signal about how even in the library, they were talking about how CRT, when it's put in practice through DEI, that is meant to get into every aspect of school life, every single aspect, including mathematics and including athletics. And that's where these two things really go together, because these are the couple of the least likely places you'd expect to find DEI. And we've also got a little bit of resistance, I think, coming from that. And I respect that. I can't read their minds. I don't know if that's really what they have in mind, but it seems like it. And I'm not saying that to be like, oh, watch out, and watch out, because now they'll say this or they'll say that. I think it's good that people say what they, put up a little bit of a resistance there. Now, over time, I will be talking about hiring practices and everything in Carney Sandow. eventually, when it comes time to replace people in those departments, they'll find people who are true believers and are willing to write things like the science thing and go along with that wholeheartedly and full-throatedly. And that's how they change. Now, NEPSAC also, I don't think your average coach is really thinking about all this or thinks it needs to have anything to do with his or her coaching. But NEPSAC does. And now you're in that organization. And people who are into CRT know that if you can get into the organizations like that, then you can start dictating what everybody has to do. Because if you're not towing the line, then you can be excluded from that organization. And that can have other ramifications. So if you'll indulge me a little bit, I would make a comparison here to ancient Greece, where we have the Delian League. Now, that started out with a lot like all these coaches. All the little city-states wanted to join up and fight against the Persians, which they did. And afterwards they said, well, we should have a big, strong navy to keep the Persians out. How will we do that? We need to work together, and what we'll do is we will all contribute ships to a large navy, and we will be able to defend ourselves against the Persians. Over time, they found it would be easier to pay money toward that navy than to provide an actual ship, especially if you're a small island. It might be too expensive to provide a ship with all the sailors. So you'd rather pay maybe 75% of that in gold or whatever the deal is. But people started paying gold, and that went to the Delian League, which was based on the island of Delos, but it was really controlled by the Athenians. So what happened was the Athenians would take that gold and build the navy. Most of it anyway. They started to think of that as their navy, and they started to think of that money as their money. And before long, they were telling all those states what they needed to do and what they could and could not do, those city-states. And secession was not an option from the Delian League. If you tried, they would go and literally destroy your island and burn it down and sell everyone into slavery. So that's how that developed. It started out as people working together for a common goal to do something good because of an emergency, and it eventually turned into a dictatorship. And I think a lot of schools are facing that with organizations like NEPSAC, and there are others, where they joined a long time ago, and it helps them, and it's good to be part of a group. But once that organization has that kind of power over you, then being excluded from it is enough of a negative that you'll start following whatever their orders are. And if they decide to be dictatorial, and if they decide that they have a theory that they want to enforce on everybody, well, they're going to be able to do that over time. I think that's a natural course of events with a lot of things like that when it comes to power and having centralized power. That's just a part of what's going on. CRT, by the way, definitely views the world in terms of power. They don't view it in terms of reason or objectivity. So the people who want their things to happen make them happen because they have the power to make them happen. And that's why they want to take over places like NEPSAC so that they do have that power. So these are not people where you can sit down and say, don't you think maybe this isn't the right thing to do, and maybe you should ease back a little bit, and let's just get back to the original goals of having an organization where it's coaches and we have inelastic support, sports, and they support each other, and those old things. And it's like, no, we don't. We've got our agenda, and you're just going to have to deal with it. That's kind of how that works, and it's too bad. And that's about it for today. There's not everybody just knuckles under to this the way science did. I think in the fullness of time, the people who wrote that will regret that they wrote what they did for science. And I think the people who wrote the mathematics and physical education ones will be proud for having stuck it out, at least as long as they could. And this can be turned around. This does not need to stand forever. This was brought in overnight. It can be gotten rid of overnight. It probably won't happen overnight, but there's no reason to give up and think that it's inevitable, because it's not. And I truly believe that freedom and individuality will win out over the concept of group identity and conformity. So take some joy in that. Take some encouragement from that. Not everybody is on board, even in these Northeast private schools. So we'll leave it there for today, I think. And I hope you'll join me for another one soon. I enjoyed doing this. And if you want to give me a like, that would be great. If you want to give me a dislike, also great. And I would love to hear what you think about anything I might have left out or should have said, or things that I shouldn't have said. If you don't like it, please tell me. As I said, I'm a big boy. I can take it. And I still want to stress that I'm not singling Winsor out for Winsor. Winsor is a lot like a lot of other schools. This document they put out is something that's easy to work with. That's one reason that I'm talking about them. There are 132,000 K through 12 schools in the country. And I'm not picking them out because, for any particular reason. That's the reason. And there are other schools that I'll be talking about, and other organizations, really. So let's not get too carried away with that. And by the way, that is not my dog. If you don't know that joke, that goes all the way back to Peter Sellers, I believe, where someone is standing on the road with a dog, and a man comes up and says, "Does your dog bite?" And he says, "No, it doesn't." And he leans over and pets the dog, who then bites him. And the man says, "You told me your dog doesn't bite." And he says, "That is not my dog." Anyway, enjoy your day. Hope to see you again next time.